Being able to trade down within tiers at positions while still maintaining production is by far the easiest way to add draft capital or more assets in general to your dynasty roster. And that is the point of this series throughout the entire offseason. And the way this is going to work is I'm going to show you stats from two similar players, but one is valued at a premium in startup drafts or trades, and the other is valued as the generic version of that player. And then we'll just break it all down. So first up, we have a wide receiver comparison, and our premium receiver is 27 years old, and over his last 17 games has averaged per game 7.2 targets, 4.5 receptions, 60 yards per game, 0.2 touchdowns per game, 15.5 fantasy points per game, with 8 top 24 weeks and 5 top 12 weeks. And our generic receiver just turned 29 years old, and over his last 17 games has averaged 7.8 targets, 4.5 receptions, 68 yards, 0.5 touchdowns, 14.6 fantasy points per game, with 8 top 24 weeks and 6 top 12 weeks. All right, if you haven't guessed it yet, our premium player is Deebo Samuel, currently valued as wide receiver 18 in June ADP, and the generic receiver is Amari Cooper, currently valued as wide receiver 35. So why the discrepancy? Well, I don't really have like a good answer for why there's 3 rounds of ADP difference between the two, but I think some of it now is age. Now that Amari is 29, he's like a year and a half older than Deebo. Plus there's some fatigue, I think, with Amari Cooper because he's been in the league for 21 years and he's just been solid for his entire career. He's never been elite, but he's never been bad, just completely solid. And that's fine, just not super valuable. But Deebo, on the other hand, had an elite season 2 years ago and still produced well when healthy last year, with basically half of his games finishing inside the top 24 and another couple games inside the top 36. However, Deebo is just not someone that I want to be holding on to in Dynasty. His price is way too inflated at wide receiver 18 in ADP to justify holding on to him for the production that he's giving you, especially when you can find similar, if not the same production at much cheaper prices. I mean, that's just Econ 101, right? The whole Niners offense is always a crapshoot every week just to determine whose week it's going to be between Deebo, Ayuk, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey now. But based on last season, it seems like Deebo Samuel is starting to become the odd man out. Brandon Ayuk is emerging as their wide receiver 1. George Kittle is just the jack of all trades at the tight end position, and Christian McCaffrey will always get 18 plus touches a game because it's Christian McCaffrey. In fact, after CMC joined the Niners last year, Deebo's production dipped from 15.5 points per game down to 11.3. His receiving production dropped, his rushing production dropped because CMC and Deebo are essentially the same player. They do the exact same things, but Christian McCaffrey is just better at all of it. On the flip side, Amari had a great year last year. 78 receptions, 1,160 yards, 9 touchdowns, and finished as the wide receiver 10 in PPR scoring. And I know there may be some fear out there that the Browns reunite Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins, and now Amari is the wide receiver 2 on the Browns, and that probably won't be that fun. But that fear, and I think just overall Amari Cooper fatigue, is just an opportunity to buy Amari on the cheap right now because best case scenario, Hopkins signs somewhere else, Tennessee, New England, wherever it is, and Amari is the wide receiver 1 again in Cleveland, just like last year, and is a really good fantasy wide receiver 2 with spike wide receiver 1 weeks. At worst, though, DeAndre Hopkins does sign with Cleveland, and Amari is just a top 30 receiver with DeAndre Hopkins as the wide receiver 2, which basically means that you got what you paid for him then, which is still fine. Right now, according to our trade analyzer, the difference between Deebo and Amari is about the 110 in Superflex leagues or the 107 or a 2024 first in one quarterback leagues. That is an enormous gap in value for two players who could realistically score the same in 2023, or Amari could just straight up outproduce Deebo Samuel like he's done in all but 1 year of both of their careers. The analyzer also has players like James Cook, Keenan Allen, AJ Dillon, Isaiah Pacheco, Pat Freiermuth, all as options to fill that gap too instead of the rookie pick, all of which I would take in a heartbeat in this deal. But I know some of you out there with Deebo Samuel have been trying to move him basically all offseason, and you just can't get fair value for him at this wide receiver 18 ADP price. But even if it was just Amari in a 24 second, or Amari and Antonio Gibson, or Chigo Konku at the tight end position, some additional piece that maybe isn't as good as a super late first or an every week starter, but still someone that's going to be usable for you at some point in the season is really what what I'm trying to go after when I'm going from Deebo Samuel to Amari Cooper. So you might have to take a little bit of a value hit to move off of Deebo, but I still think it's worth it as long as that plus is going to be a usable asset. Next up, we have a running back comparison, and I had to finagle this a little bit, but it makes sense, and I'll explain why after. But our premium running back is currently 22, turning 23 in October, and over his last 10 games played, playing over 50% of snaps, has averaged per game 20 rush attempts, 2.7 targets, 2.1 receptions, 102 total yards, 0.8 touchdowns, 17.1 fantasy points per game, with 8 top 24 weeks and 3 top 12 weeks. And our generic running back just turned 24 years old, and over his last 10 games played with over 50% of snaps, has averaged per game 19 rush attempts, 2.2 targets, 1.8 receptions, 106 total yards, 0.7 touchdowns, 16.7 fantasy points per game, with 8 top 24 weeks and 4 top 12 weeks. And here, just to further feed the comparison, both running backs were second-round picks in their draft classes. Both of their teams also drafted a running back in this year's draft class, and they're both currently playing in the same division. Now, those extra bits of info probably gave it away, but if you haven't guessed it yet, our premium player is Kenneth Walker, currently valued as RB13 in June ADP, and the generic player is Cam Akers, valued at RB22 in June ADP, about 3 rounds after Walker. So why the discrepancy here? Well, this one's a little bit easier to explain. Walker is coming off of a fantastic rookie season, and Akers has been recovering from his torn Achilles injury in 2021 and is also a year and a half older in age. But look at the numbers here from both of them. From when they both been the starters for their team, they're almost identical numbers. Sure, I had to go back to 2020 to grab enough games where Akers played half the snaps just to match what Walker did last year. But Walker also probably isn't going to see that same workhorse volume because Seattle drafted Zach Charbonnet in the second round this year, whereas Akers is still the guy in LA, with their only additions being a 6th round Zach Evans and then just recently signing Sony Michel. So when we're projecting forward for 2023, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Akers just flat out outscored Kenneth Walker. He showed he was healthy to end the year last year, pacing for 1,500 total yards and 13 touchdowns on almost 300 touches from week 11 on. And that was in an offense without Matthew Stafford, without Cooper Kupp. So if the Rams are better and more efficient with them healthy in 2023, Akers could finally have the season that we've wanted from him since he entered the league in 2020. On the flip side, though, no one knows how the split between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet is going to look this year, but it probably won't look like Walker's usage last year, where he was pacing for 350 touches once he got the starting role, with 6 of his 11 games seeing 23 or more touches, and 3 of those games actually being over 28 touches. I highly doubt that he gets that volume again with Zach Charbonnet in the mix, and that drop in usage is really why Walker has already fallen from being a consensus top 5, if not top 3 dynasty running back, to now just being a top 15 dynasty running back. But even still, I know that there are a lot of you who are probably still not that thrilled with his expected production, and that's why I think moving on from Kenneth Walker to Cam Akers could be a valuable move. Right now in our trade analyzer, the difference between the two is about the 107 to 108 in Superflex, or the 1.04-ish in one quarterback leagues, both of which I think are smashes because you can maintain production at the running back position while taking the shot on a wide receiver like Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, Zay Flowers. You could even take Zach Charbonnet too and still have a piece of the Seahawks backfield if you wanted to. Or if you wanted a veteran with Akers instead of the rookie pick, you could be looking at Jahan Dotson, Jameson Williams, Christian Kirk, Aaron Jones. Maybe you get Amari Cooper in here too. That could just be as good of a move to contend in 2023 as anything else. Or just kick the can down the road entirely and go Cam Akers and a 2024 first and just see where that pick ends up. I think you have a lot of options here because some people might think that they're buying low on Kenneth Walker right now, but in reality, you're just shifting your production to a different RB2 and getting something on top, which is extremely savvy when done correctly in Dynasty. But I've made videos like this every single month since the offseason started, so if you want to check out May's version of this, which I still think is very applicable today, then you can check that video out right up here.